Is corn after corn broken? Producers from around the state can find lower yields on continuous corn acres. But is there a way to solve it? Emerson Nafziger, University of Illinois agronomist and extension agent, says it's an ongoing problem that has plenty of challenges. When weather deals a tough hand to the corn crop, it can be compounded, especially on corn acres.
2010 and 2011, neither year was particularly good for corn after corn, and in some areas it was just brutal on the crop. We heard some of the largest differences that I've ever heard of, more than 100 bushel difference. People with the same fields and pretty much the same hybrids planted about the same time. Getting that kind of yield penalty, especially when the price is high, really hurts. Probably hurts even more when the price is low, but when we have an expectation that the two crops aren't going to yield too much differently, because that's been our experience in recent years, and I think we were sort of lulled into thinking that we've pretty much got this corn-on-corn problem licked. We had some farmers would tell you they had better yields in corn-on-corn, at least some of the recent years, and then these last 2 years, and the other part that hurts, of course, is it's not very uniformly distributed, this problem. Central Illinois pretty much caught the brunt of it both years. And the reason for the last reason for the yield loss was similar, I think, in the 2 years, and that is that the crop simply wasn't able to take up enough water to keep itself going during the middle and towards the latter end part of the growing season when it needs that water to make grain. And so it's an old story that takes rain to make grain, but we certainly saw that these last 2 years. Many people had better rainfall in 2010 than they did in 2011, at least in July and August. And the plants were in different shape in the 2 years, where we had these problems with corn after corn. The biggest issue in 2010 was the damage that had been done to the root systems by standing water. And I talked about this some at the time it happened. A year ago, we said, well, that's a fluke, these 6-inch rainfalls in June, and the crop was growing like gangbusters. It had been planted early in 2010, and some of these root systems just took damage that they couldn't grow back from. That we almost saw it happen in front of our eyes. Didn't take very much standing water in the last part of June in 2010 to have a crop that just was never going to have a good root system again. This year was different. I think we had pretty good root systems in general. And we were late in planting this year. 90% of our corn crop in Illinois was planted after May the 1st. We planted it very fast. I think we probably panicked a little bit. It got to May 1st, and probably a majority of farmers didn't have anything planted at that point, and we sort of pulled out all the stops. Now, I've learned long ago in Illinois not to tell people, well, you can't go plant, it's just too wet to drive out there. Because once the calendar turns May, a lot of people think that, well, it may be better to wait, but I just can't afford to wait. I have to get this crop in the ground. And that, I think, pretty much took over in 2011. I was looking at the evaporation rates and the rainfall and this kind of thing. The 2 years were completely different in that regard. And in April and May of 2011, you can't make much of a case that these soils had dried out very well. It was wet and cool and just not very good drying conditions. We planted something like 60% of our crop in the first 2 weeks of May. Most of that was into soil conditions that we probably would have wished could be a little bit better. Now, our soils are forgiving in Illinois, and that usually we have to ask a lot of forgiveness of the soils. And in 2011, I think it's a simple case where the forgiving part means that we'll get enough rainfall with what the soils hold that the crop won't come under serious stress, even if we do compaction and plant into conditions that aren't very good. This last year in some areas that just didn't work out. And people with almost no rainfall in July and August, after decent rainfall and a crop that wasn't in too bad a condition by mid to late June, in many areas just continued to deteriorate, and some of the later planted crops just never really got going. The corn after corn, I guess unusual for it to be hurt as badly as it was compared to corn after soybean. But in the worst areas, neither crop was what we would have hoped. In other words, corn on soybeans might have yielded 140, 150, and normally we would have said, boy, that really got hurt. But this year, the corn after corn that was in the field next to it was yielding 60 or 70, and so it was just a disheartening thing to see in some areas, and in some of the more productive areas is at that.
So can the system be fixed? Nafziger says that rootworms, who could have been a problem with yields in certain areas last year, will certainly be a problem on corn and corn acres. But the fix simply has been timely rains and adequate soil moisture.
I think that's the key question. Do I think that there's something broken about corn after corn, that it just isn't ever going to work quite the same? The answer to that is no. I think one of the rootworm issue that Mike Gray is talking about certainly might have played a part in some fields. This is the kind of year, with the kind of weather pattern that we had in 2011, that you simply, anything that contributes to the roots being able to pick up a little more water is going to contribute a lot to yield. And I think that's the main reason corn on soybeans just seemed to have a little better ability to get its root system down, tapped into the soil water. In a year like this, where some people got less than an inch of rain in July, the crop clearly is going to need 5 or 6 inches of rain in July, and it has to get the water somewhere. If it isn't getting it in rain, it has to come from the soil. So anything we do that will improve the ability of the root system to tap into the soil is going to help generally. But in terms of big management changes, nitrogen, population, hybrid choices, we think that we just have to stay the course after a year like this last year. If we get weather in 2012 exactly like we got in 2011, we're probably going to have a corn-on-corn problem again. It did help. Northern Illinois was, they planted as wet as anybody, but they got a little better rainfall in July and August, and they had pretty good yields at the end. So it's going to come down to a rainfall issue to a large extent. I think we should just, as best we can, sort of think ahead. Are there things we can do to put this crop under, to improve its water supply, even if just a little bit? And in some cases, that might be doing less tillage. Less tillage does help the crop to have a little more water available. But our tillage comparisons this year were not really unusual. No-till certainly wasn't a solution to the problem, and it didn't make it really worse either. But I think unless people are doing things that are clearly, sort of not the right thing to do, I don't think I'd look for very many changes. Another issue that some people that I've talked to are saying, well, we're just going to put more nitrogen on because our crop was clearly deficient in 2011, and the corn after corn especially. That's a pretty dangerous thing to do. Our data really don't suggest that the nitrogen response was very unusual in 2011. Possible exception to that is areas where a lot of nitrogen was lost, and fall nitrogen was an issue again. But we've gone back in the fall, this last fall now, and put a lot more on again. So I think that's one of those that comes and goes, and we should be prepared to rescue with later nitrogen, but do that only if we have to. And I really get worried when people say, well, we need to put on 30 or 40 pounds more nitrogen than we did in 2011. I can guarantee you that more nitrogen was not a solution, not helpful in some of these fields where corn on corn suffered this last year.
Nafziger is keeping an eye on the weather. He says this past winter, With the warmth and lack of snow is only notable because we're able to quickly recall the data, and one type of weather has little to do with extended forecasts. He chooses not to guess too much about how the rest of the spring and summer will play out.
Oh, I've had 30 winters and 30 seasons in Illinois now, and the correlations are one that we remember some of the things that we think means that the winter weather of a certain sort means the summer weather of a certain sort. If you really looked at the numbers, and if we had sort of perfect recall of these things and didn't just remember the extremes, I think we'd have to come to the conclusion that the winter weather doesn't mean very much. We've had some really good seasons following mild sort of low snow winters, and we've had some fairly poor seasons following cold winters. We do have some kind of human tendency to think if we have better weather than normal, why it's going to come back and punish us at some point. But the reality of it is that weather is kind of a random event. It's very difficult to predict, and I don't think we've ever done ourselves very much good to think that we can outguess the weather and do something very different than we would normally do. The nice thing about the winter is there isn't anything that's using water out there, so any rainfall you get tends to go into the soil and more or less stay there. We still have plenty of time to get some of that, but in terms of what's lurking out there that the winter's not going to kill if it stays like this, I think the answer is not very much, and I think we can just enjoy the sunshine and when we've got it, and get through the snowfall and cold temperatures, and we've got those, and hope for good things to happen this spring and summer.
The good winter did give producers plenty of time to work the ground and accomplish more tile projects. Nafziger says while you might not be able to over-tile a field, farmers could be approaching diminishing returns.
That's right. I think a lot of people have discovered that, they've kind of run out of big changes they can make to try to improve the chances for a better crop, and tiling then comes along, and the ability to do our own in some cases, or certainly a little bit lower cost, and it's a little bit less in terms of the land prices. It's certainly a lower percentage than it was back 30 or 40 years ago to put tile into a field. I think that we do run a danger of overdoing it just a little. We see people putting new tile between the old tile lines, and but there's nothing that improves a wet, poorly drained field more than tile. There's no question about that. I think most of our poorest drained fields are already tiled, and so now it's a question: how much do we run the plow in the winter? And do we need more pipes out there to get the water off the field? People also discovered with yield monitors, that it was talked up a lot 5 or 6 years ago. Well, you can see how much these low spots are costing you, and people did, and then people took steps to correct them. So that's a piece of ground that we're farming. We want to do everything that we can, and tiling is certainly one of those ways. The downside, if there is one to tiling, besides the cost, is that it does make a path for nitrates to get out to the water, and in these lower, wetter fields, they didn't really have that path before, and so we're going to continue to struggle with the issue that's, at least in the public's mind, nitrates getting into river water is a great big problem, and there's no question that when you create a way for nitrate to get out of a field, they don't tend to run off of fields that much because typically they're in the soil. And so when we do put tile in, we do increase the movement of nitrates. Now, our best hope is that we're managing nitrogen properly and we're minimizing that. But nitrate coming out of tile lines is certainly never zero. And the way that we have these higher organic matter soils that produce some nitrogen on their own, we simply can't bring it down to zero. But using responsible rates and putting them on at the right time can certainly help.